The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
The voice of the creative economy.
With Vincent Heeringa.
From Idealog magazine and all the other magazines under the HB Media stable. Vincent Heeringa, good morning.
Good morning, Wammo.
And I saw you on the ad show last week on TVNZ7, a very impassioned interview that you gave as well, Vincent.
Well, don't get me started about the public relations industry, or at least the media relations industry, because I'm at the receiving end. Well, you know, as a journalist and then as a media owner, you're at the receiving end of a daily deluge of PR requests and pitches. And so they asked me, and I told them.
You told them you hate it. You don't like it.
I was probably perhaps. No, I wasn't more extreme than what I actually think I do. It's annoying. It is very annoying because so much of what gets pitched to the media, so this is kind of an industry issue, I suppose. It's maybe of less relevance to ordinary... Although it is interesting for people who consume magazines or radio or TV to find out what happens behind the scenes and how some of that information actually gets to the viewer or listener or reader. Yeah, absolutely. What you should be able to do is look at a news story and try and pick who is pitching the piece, who is it for, who are the beneficiaries of that story, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, a lot of the time the sources of stories have a motivation to talk to the media, and that's always been the case. So there is always an angle going on. Yeah. But I think what happens with the PR industry, it's become now such an industry that rather than actually being a source for stories, they are an industry for just pitching client work. And where it bothers me as a publisher is the same companies that used to advertise or do sponsorships or joint ventures with us to actually produce a magazine and pay for the pages that get created now have decided, because of the capitulation of the media industry, that they don't need to do that. They just hire a PR agency and get their copy run for free. But of course there's no free lunch, because I still have to pay for the journalists and the designers and the printers and the distribution, and if I don't have any advertising or sponsorship support, and if people are, increasingly consumers are not prepared to pay for the information they consume, who's going to pay? And so my argument is that the more aggressive the PR becomes, the more aggressive the freeloading is, and eventually they will kill the goose that lays the golden egg.
And as you say, I mean, it's also because PR is so prolific these days. There's so many different companies out there, and as you say, a lot of it is pretty poor kind of pitches that reach your desk. But I mean, do you like to reward smart PR, clever PR?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I treat them just like I do other sources. So if a PR person comes to me with a great story, that's awesome. Thank you. That has really helped my day. So yeah, I'm not denying that they have their uses, but I guess 80%, well, maybe somewhere between 60 and 80% of the pitches that we receive are just annoying, and they're annoying because they haven't thought about who are our readers, what do they want to hear, how can I help Vincent grow his audience, how could I do things that would be mutually beneficial to expand the magazine reach or the circulation or the page count. All they want to do is just ring me up, and typically they're really ill-informed, so they often don't even know the magazines that we have.
And so that's poor. I mean, that is really poor. It's like someone it's like someone approaching Kiwi and they're not knowing 100% New Zealand music, or the fact that or the various people that I talk to in the morning and the type of audience that we might have.
It's just it's exactly poor. So you wouldn't, if you were selling I don't know, if you were selling pens, you wouldn't rock up to to someone that never has a use for pens. So, the majority, I'm afraid, is young people who come straight out of university and are given the job to flog a press release, and it's kind of ill-informed and actually just a nuisance.
Yeah. Well, let's move on from that to something completely different, the silent revolution that's going on, Vincent.
Everywhere I go now, Wammo, and maybe it's because we write about sustainability a lot, but, I spend quite a lot of time with business people, and everywhere I go now, business, from large multinationals through to small companies, is working on the assumption that climate change is real. that carbon will have a cost, and that we will be doing business in a carbon-constrained world, and where you need to be transparent about your emissions. And I find it kind of ironic that it's business that's leading the charge on this, not the government, which is not what you'd expect. Now, I'll just give you an example. Yesterday I spent a couple of hours with, I get the pronunciation of his name, Michio Shinahoto, who is one of the R&D leaders for Honda worldwide. And it was really interesting that Honda have made the assumption that their cars have to be low emission, low fuel use, and account for all the embedded energy that they contain. And so if they're working on that assumption, then their technology is being driven to meet those goals. And it's kind of interesting, that at the same time that we have people like Rodney Hyde encouraging people to imagine that there's this fantasy land where carbon is not constrained, large multinationals have already moved on and are investing billions into the technology for this kind of future world.
Well, that's really positive. And certainly it's not something that we are used to hearing about.
It's not, and it gives you some pause for thought about how New Zealand is becoming out of step with the rest of the OECD. Where
politically out of step or business out of step?
I think politically, more than anything else, that we are still operating at a level of relative ignorance, I suspect. Now, I'll give you another example of where the difference is coming in. So the Rugby World Cup, I'm attending a seminar this week where anyone that is pitching for business to supply services to the Rugby World Cup, like anyone from a lawyer through to a sausage vendor, 25% of their pitch will be judged on sustainability type criteria.
Right.
Now, this is kind of unheralded. It's just we're calling it the silent revolution, because it's kind of like embedding sustainability into ordinary business now. So it's quite a big proportion. It's not 2% or 5%. It's a quarter of your tender will be judged on sustainability criteria. And what's meant there is things like, what's your waste management process? Are you carbon audited? Do you have any kind of certification for your products or services from the likes of Environmental Choice or Carbon Zero or something like that?
Is that so that overall the Rugby World Cup can then say we're a sustainable event, or are they aiming for that? Yes,
yeah. But they're not making bold claims, but what they are saying is there are some key areas, there's 4 key areas where we want to minimise our impact. And one of them is, I think the 4 are transport, waste, emissions, and the other one, which I can't quite remember at the moment.
I mean, obviously, the businesses at the end of the day. So are they thinking that punters will want to attend the Rugby World Cup, with one of the reasons being that it's a sustainable event? I
think at one level it's just as cynical as branding, that the world's attention will be on Auckland, and so the Auckland Regional Council is taking a real lead on this to say, at the very least, let's not screw it up by being seen to be wasteful or polluting. And they're not unrealistic. They're not saying that people will turn up because it's going to be a greener World Cup. They're saying, what's the risk? The risk is that we get portrayed as a bunch of unsustainable backward turkeys.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Vincent.
It's a pleasure, Wammo.
Vincent Heeringa. You'll find him blogging at idealog.co.nz. Also round about the traps at stoppress.co.nz, and also in Good Magazine as well.